So you had the opportunity to be in senior roles early on in your life. Were you sort of a docile, casual, mellow business guy, or were you a little bit of a type A?
Yeah, no, I'm sure I was the former, right?
Yeah, right.
So I was, I was a wind-up toy for achievement, I guess is the best way to describe it.
A wind-up toy for achievement.
So just, show me something, I'll figure out how to try to be good at it. And but yeah, I was. Got an undergrad degree in chemistry and biology, thought I wanted to be a doctor, decided not to be a doctor for two reasons. One was I loved science and I loved the idea of helping people, but when I really thought about it, I didn't like the nature of the work, giving shots and seeing sick people. But secondly, I really became enamored with this idea of leverage, and I realized the doctor's contribution to society is limited to the 8 or 10 hours a day they work. And I thought, if you have the right set of goals, your contribution is multiplied by the number of people you have working toward those goals. So I knew nothing about business. Both parents were veterinarians. I didn't even know there was such thing as an MBA. And but I knew I wanted to graduate school. So
let me just pause it. That's actually a big idea, the concept of leverage. I mean, we often think of it in our investment portfolios, gearing and leverage, multiplying, doing more with less, reaching more. But to think of that as a young man, it's unusual.
It was who I was. I mean, I just wrestled with that question. Yeah. And, in retrospect, as you know, spent a long time wrestling over this question of meaning in work. But yeah, so no, I was a kind of high-octane guy. I mean, my first job out of business school was a CFO, and I couldn't even spell CFO. Of course,
well, you were a chemistry major, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
if it wasn't a compound, you couldn't get there, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But it was a great place to start, and I joined a startup company. I had 5 offers coming out of school and took the lowest paying job of the 5 offers. So I had a little trouble with math, But the good news is I had Linda. So we figured if we lost everything we had, it would only be a nickel 98. And so that's what I did. So I've been part of entrepreneurial companies for 30 years.
Well, that's pretty terrific. And speaking of 30 plus years, you and Linda have been married how many years?
33.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
That's pretty cool. How about let's lift it up for that.
The applause was for Linda, as you know.
So as you were going through these jobs, I mean, to being in the entrepreneurial space, which has really been your passion. I mean, you worked for Nextel, obviously a big company. You've worked for big and small companies. What is it that drew you to this entrepreneurial space? It's higher risk, a whole bunch of things, more demanding in your time, away from your family.
Yeah, I wouldn't have necessarily predicted that would have been the draw at an early age, but I guess it was because, when coming out of school, I wanted to do something that, as I described it, I wanted to be professionally naked. I mean, I wanted to
Professionally naked?
Yeah.
I don't think of that when I go to work each day.
I'd worked for Hewlett-Packard, and I felt like I was, in this small cog in this enormous watch, and if I died, it wouldn't make a difference, and probably nobody noticed. So that was why I took this job, is I wanted to be something where I thought I could make a contribution, but something was growing very fast, and where the absolute level of contribution could grow. And that was the draw to me, was to kind of see if we could do it. And somehow the idea of taking a salary and getting an X% raise every year for the next 30 years was very confining to me. Right.
But I want to loop back to that, because many of us in the room will have jobs where we've maybe been with the same bank or industry sector and maybe moved from, and sometimes there's a feeling even in senior roles that we're still just a cog in the machine. You could be an MD at a prominent bank, you could be an EVP somewhere, and there's sometimes a sense that if I get run over by a truck tomorrow, will anyone miss me? I mean, actually, what would you say to that?
No, I think it's a very valid question, and I think it has a lot to do with perspective. I mean, I've really come to see the power of perspective. The way we see dramatically affects the way we live and the way we act. And so if we see ourselves as this small cog in this big machine that I have no control over that and there's nothing I can do, I think that's probably how we operate. But even in a very large company, if you say, I am responsible for this set of people who are placed under my care, and I'm responsible for this set of activities, then we are responsible for that, and that we can move the machine forward. But people are just wired differently. I'm not a guy who does well in a high amount of imposed structure. Right. Like when I started a small company and then got recruited to, we started this company with 8 employees and grew to a couple hundred employees, and then joined a company of 2,500. And I realized, I didn't mind bureaucracy as long as we were the ones creating it. But if it was imposed on me, I was really railed against that.
Right.
So.
Right. You've talked about achievement sometimes, and I mean, I am probably many of us in this room, we're achievement driven, and there's something actually good about that, right? As opposed to not using our gifts, thinking of it from a faith perspective, that if we have some God-given gifts, well, we ought to nurture and develop and leverage them. Yet sometimes you had it a little bit out of whack. Talk a bit about achievement, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I had it like a lot out of whack. I mean, maybe the best example, and really the way I came to see just how I was wired for achievement was in the largest failure of my life. So
the largest failure of your life.
Yeah.
You know, most people don't lead with their largest failure, but go for it. That's good.
Well, you know, I think actually we connect with each other more in our failures and our successes. It's easy to stand up here, but
just no one in this room has ever failed, so you're good.
Perfect. Yeah, this is Greenwich, right? So I've been this is the 7th business I've been associated with in 6 different companies. 5 out of 6 have been successful, but the one that wasn't was a large-scale startup doing business in Brazil. So this company had won the license to compete with the incumbent phone company in Brazil. I joined as a CFO. We raised $2.5 billion, hired 4,000 people in 2 years, because the way we won the license was to commit to building out service in 80 cities in 2 years. So it was this massive build-up. It was a joint venture with Bell Canada, Qualcomm, and this private company in Denver that I was a part of. So we raised all that money. It took off like a rocket. I mean, it was the fastest growing competitive local exchange carrier in the world. Put on 500,000 customers in 10 months. The stock price tripled. We turned money away. We did the 4th largest venture capital raise in U.S. history at this time. We raised $255 million in one round, and boom, off we go. And we had a tiger by the tail, and then the capital markets crashed. And we saw some cracks show up in the operations of those 500,000 customers. Ultimately, 200,000 of them couldn't pay their bills, and that for those of you who are less financially oriented, that's a problem. So I got recruited by the shareholders, asked if I would move to Brazil and be the CEO. So I moved to Brazil before we knew how serious the issues were. Linda's only requirement was that I had a bodyguard, which I did, and a bulletproof car. So I was chauffeured around. And when I got there, it was way, way worse than I thought, and ended up having to lay off 1,500 out of 4,000 people and doing press conferences in Portuguese, translators, which, and with the leadership team, it was horrific. Ultimately, we sold the company, restructured the debt. People got some money out of it, but they didn't get all their money back. By the way, we invested personally because I felt, 1, I believed in the company, but 2 is I felt ethically bound. If we're going to raise that much money, we need to be in it together. So, but that business failure, to get directly to your question, just paled in comparison to just the spiritual anguish that came from that. And I just wrestled, and I found myself reading Job. There are like 42 chapters of Job. It's a very long book of just this pain. And coming out of the Christian tradition, these just words of Christ just penetrated me. If any of you who does not give up everything he has can't be my disciple. And Lynn and I would say to each other, gosh, we've given up everything. I moved to Brazil, left the family in Colorado because I knew it was going to be that tough. And, what else do I have left to give? And out of that experience, I realized in that failure that it wasn't until I came into a failure like that and saw that when the achievement went away, a big part of my God went away.
Yeah, so when you associate achievement essentially with your God.
Achievement was my God. I did not realize that. When I said I was a wind-up toy for achievement, that is actually the truth. I mean, what happened to me was I had the input pipes and the output pipes hooked up backwards. That's the way I kind of describe it. I said, well, what does that mean? Well, I needed to achieve to somehow be filled up. And when I then began to really realize, no, this is a life that has to start with surrender, and that then achievement is an expression of who we are rather than something that we are required to feel filled up on the inside. And once I began to look at it through that inverted way, there was this sort of second renewal for me and this sense of freedom. And what happened, really the second part of the question for me is, the society says plan your work and work your plan, start with the end in mind. And the question was, are you willing to live fully in the present moment and let God unfold the pattern of your life as he sees fit? And I said, no, I'm really not. But as I began to realize that, it completely inverted my perspective of time and the way I thought about it, and came into this place of freedom that I honestly didn't know existed before.
So if achievement is no longer sort of equated with your God, what is your God now?
Well, not all of the time, but I think it's the true God. So for me, I came prior to that time actually to a surrendered faith out of a crisis of meaning and work. You asked me completely rhetorically whether I was a type A, hardwired kind of a guy, right? And
that was a serious question.
yeah. With a predictable answer, right? So coming out of business school in the late 20s, and I would join the startup company, which was growing fast. It was the 110th fastest growing company in the U.S. And Lynn and I were both working 60 to 80 hours a week because we wanted to. We were investing in our careers, and I came to this place of just saying why, and why am I working so hard, and kind of being an achievement-oriented guy. I was actually got invited to this camp in Colorado. It sits at the base of Mount Princeton, and if any of you ever been up in that part of the world, and it's just beautiful. It looks over the Arkansas River Valley, and I'm looking over this valley, and I just start weeping. And it's like, what is this about? And it was the juxtaposition of the serenity of that environment just stood in striking contrast to this turmoil within me. And it was like, I am tired of living a divided life. I wasn't suicidal, but I said, I'm just not willing to go on living a divided life. I want to submit myself to something that is true instead of walking haltingly down the path, kind of looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'm on the right path. So
what do you mean by divided life, if I can interrupt?
Well, am I living a life for God? Because Lynn and I,
do the church thing on Sunday.
And do the work thing on Monday, and divide it. I just had never felt totally sold out. I felt like I was hedging my bets and kind of making sure that there was a safety net there. And just I wanted to sell out to something, but I didn't want to sell out unless I knew it was true. There's a deep sense of skepticism within me. So I'm a science guy, and so there's a sense of I need to understand this is true. So I just felt like I hadn't completely submitted to something. I wanted to give my life away in a way that was meaningful, but I didn't know to what or to whom. So as that question clarified in my mind, it was, by what measure will you judge the success of your life? And I could not answer the question. So I read 16 books in 8 months and stopped going to church because I decided it was hypocritical. I didn't know if God existed. And what I thought was a question about purpose in work, what really turned out to be a question of purpose in life. And out of that came a conclusion that I decided I can't prove the existence of God one way or the other. So I'm going to do like the lawyers. I'm going to say, based on the preponderance of the evidence, I'm going to make a decision that he exists. Because either he does or he doesn't, no matter what we think. I said, okay, I'm going to just make it a decision. So I said, okay, he exists. And then it was, who are you going to live your life for, God or yourself? And that came into a place of, and I really think this is the only station that the train leads from on the spiritual journey, is the station marked surrender. So it was, are you willing to surrender your life and then answer the call to come follow me into the future I have in mind? So, which is scary stuff if you're a driven type A achievement kind of guy. It's very scary, and the way I thought about it is I asked every question I could think of, and then ultimately I actually read a little story about this guy who was lost in the fog in Switzerland, and he comes to the edge of a precipice, and he cries out for help, and the guy answers, and he says, "Oh, just go ahead and jump." And the guy said, "Well, how do I know? Why should I jump? It's foggy. I can't. It's only 3 feet. Just jump, And he asked every question he could think of, and what's your name, and how do you know this part of the territory, and then at some point he asked every question he could think of, and then it was still a decision, am I going to jump or not? And that was what it was like for me, and I said, okay. And it was, the way I describe it is I kind of came into this surrendered life with heel marks in the sand. I just, okay.
That's a great image. That's a great. You've talked about in some of our other conversations about whether we get meaning from work, and do we only get meaning from work if we have really sort of exciting knowledge kind of work that's stimulating and intellectual and exotic, and how could someone who has a more of a routine job find meaning in their work? And we've talked about that. Share a bit of something you're thinking. I really like the way you've come to on that.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, this kind of crisis that came to a watershed event literally on that mountaintop in Colorado, I thought was a question over meaning in work. It was a question of purpose in life. And I realized, okay, my purpose in life is to live for God instead of myself. But it still didn't answer the question of meaning in work. And I then got recruited to be CFO of this company called Fluke Corporation. Yeah, if it works, it must be a. And we had 2,500 employees in a public company, and I was 35, and it was like, okay, creating shareholder value just doesn't get me out of bed in the morning, I mean, so how do I make that connection? So I ended up writing 350 pages to myself, mostly in the middle of the night, just wrestling with this. And I realized, God for me is cardio.
By the way, did he really write? I want a little truth test here, a fact checker. Did he really write 350 pages in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Linda, she sleeps with it. She says it's like having a baby in the house. I'm up all night. Yeah. It's like having a baby in the house in lots of ways, I might point out, but particularly with regard to sleep. So anyway, I'm going through that. I realized, again, so God is sort of cardiologist and psychiatrist to me. Mm-hmm. Most of my issues are conditions of the heart or conditions of the mind, mental problems and heart problems, So this was mostly a mental problem in that I was thinking about it all wrong. And I won't read you the whole 350 pages, but what God took me through is a succession of paradigm shifts is the way that I came to describe it.
Succession of paradigm shifts.
Yeah, that I just was thinking about things so wrongly. And at the core of that were two things. One is I was thinking about life from the outside in instead of the inside out. If I just get the right job, somehow I'll be filled up and so on. So it was, one of the guys I worked with was on 26 boards. Why are you on 26 boards? It's because you want to rub shoulders with these people, right? Well, he was not filled up on the inside. He was trying to get filled up. And I was guilty of the same thing in a different way. But the second thing was, and related to that, was I was trying to derive meaning from the work instead of bringing meaning to the work. And I began to realize, particularly in business, where there's less intrinsic value, unlike being a teacher or a doctor or...
you could see the goodness of it right away.
It's easy, yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah, why am I a doctor? Well, I'm helping people live more full lives. That's easy. But in business, we're here to make money, and so the onus is on us to bring meaning to the work. And when I began to see that, and I realized, it's God's perspective of the work that is the ultimate meaning, and that led me into a path of trying to understand, well, how might he be thinking about it?
And I think that's a huge inversion of how we think about things. So we often think if I get the right boss, the right job, the right company, everything will be happy. But it doesn't necessarily bring meaning, but that's something we bring. And a lot of times I think we're in jobs that we just have forgotten how to figure out how they fit in the universe and how they are helping society, just even providing salaries and insurance and how we treat the people. There's so much of what we bring to the workplace.
Yeah, and as I began to kind of come to see that, and the test for me was, how do I connect this moment, what I'm doing right here, right now, with purpose in life? That was a test. It's a very simple test. If I'm giving a performance review, if we're working on a strategy, if we're raising money, if I've got somebody working for me that's doing a formula and Excel spreadsheet for a budget, how do we connect that with purpose in life? And I could not answer that question for years, 17 years in retrospect. So for me, that was a test. And then I began to reconceive of my job through this lens and began to realize that, my working job definition became, my job is to contribute to a better society as seen through the eyes of God.
Let me say again, to contribute
to a better society as seen through the eyes of God.
Okay.
So a better society, well, how do you judge a better society? Well, what would you think? Mm-hmm. And then, if that's the role, what is the role of business in that context? Mm-hmm. And then I began to fundamentally rethink the role of business, and now have come to describe the role of the fundamental purpose of business is to serve. And it also is to contribute to a better society. And we could have a really engaging conversation about how business does that. You all would have great ideas about that. But I think about it in 4 ways. That the way business contributes to a better society uniquely, one is responsible value creation. So you asked me, are you wired as an entrepreneur? It's taken me a long time to realize that, why am I just so viscerally wired to have companies get more valuable? And I realized it's sort of this notion of responsible value creation. And that's just a huge part of who I am. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but have you ever thought about the fact that business is the only entity that creates economic value? Every other entity distributes it. So, we're very involved with serving the poor in Central America, for example, and you only have to get off the airplane in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and you say, there's something different about this place, right? Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things that are different, but one is GDP per capita. So, and not that money is the solution to the world's problems, but it is the hallmark of a well-functioning society. So that is business's unique contribution, is to be able to create economic value that enables us to help people flourish. And then the others are creating an environment for employees that enables them to grow into the full expression of themselves. I mean, I just think that we are designed to live life to the fullest. And when you have all these employees, have you ever done the math on how many hours we'll work in our lifetime? Has anybody ever done the math? Could guess how many it is? 100,000. Yeah, that's right. You got a lot of math guys here. 100,000, about 100,000 hours in our career. Well, that's a lot of hours to go home and kick your dog every night if you don't like what you do. And so when we're leaders of businesses, we have a huge impact on people's lives by creating workspaces that enables them to contribute to their abilities. And
what are the other two?
So one is serving customers. And I've been in the cell phone business, and I've been in the voice of RP business, the instrument business. Now we're in a business where we make high-octane gasoline out of wood chips that actually helps reverse global warming. We can talk more about that if you want.
Yeah,
so that one's obvious. But even in the cell phone business, when I was at Vonage, for example, I spent a lot of time listening to customers. And there's a guy who's 80 years old trying to figure out how to hook up his Vonage phone, and said, "Mabel, can you go get the cord behind the desk?" And I'm on the phone, and
my mom uses Vonage, and she was probably one of the ones.
Probably was. Yeah.
85 years old, bless her. Yeah.
We probably sent the guy out to go hook it up for her, right? So, but helping them save money on phone bills. I mean, that's a helpful contribution and a legitimate need. So that serving customer, and then the last one is being a good corporate citizen. And again, at Vonage, when some of the disasters hit in Asia, we offered free calling to Japan or Southeast Asia. So those are the things for me: responsible value creation, serving customers, creating an environment for employees, and being a good corporate citizen. And when you think about business as opportunity to serve in that way, now every moment has meaning if I look at it through that lens.
It's interesting. There's a guy, I don't have permission to mention his name, so I won't, but he is a very senior executive at a bank you all know in New York City. And we were talking the other day about recruiting young people, and he's very active in recruiting and wants the sort of the best and brightest to come. And he said, I love when someone says, how can I help society? Because all the younger folks, they want to do good. They have high values. They want to work in a socially responsible business. And they sometimes press to him like, well, why should I go work for your big bank when I could do some entrepreneurial thing? And he says, well, feel free to do something entrepreneurial. But if you want to change society, there is no better place than a large business. There's leverage, there's infrastructure, there's distribution channels, there's resources. And do you want to be part of the change? Come on in. And it's a very compelling talk. But it's hard to remember sometimes when we're kind of midway through a career or slogging in it.
Yeah, and I think, we're back talking about the perspective we bring to it. I mean, it's a fun exercise to do. We can have a life-giving or a life-draining perspective of virtually any job. And that's actually was one of the ahas for me. Was I was riding on a bus from the outside parking lot going to the airport, and these bus drivers like zombies, right? Well, there happened to be this woman who happened to be an African American who was just like chatting it up and really friendly, and I was the last of my fellow cheapskates to get off the bus because I park in the outline.
Long distance parking, right?
Yeah. So I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And she said, "Sure." And I said, "Do you like your job?" She said, "I love my job." Okay.
Is this Certain Arrogance, Hertz rental driver, or whatever?
Exactly. And I said, "Why do you like your job?" She said, "I meet interesting people going interesting places." She's still driving the bus, and I thought, okay, she's bringing the meaning to the work. So back to the person in the 60,000 person operation, how am I not just a cog in a big watch? Yeah. The onus is on us to be able to articulate a life-giving purpose to work. And I often talk with young people, and to me it's a measure of call. Can you articulate something that viscerally makes this job seem fun and energizing and brings you life? And if you can do that, it's probably something that you would want to pour yourself into.
Yeah. I sometimes spend too much time with people who are way smarter than me. And sometimes there's an arrogance, maybe it's just academia, I don't know, but there's an arrogance that regular labor or quote unquote unskilled labor or redundant repetitive jobs cannot be a calling, or they can't be a central part of someone's life in a healthy way. And there's a certain arrogance to that because in sort of God's created order, it's to your point, it's what we bring to the job, what we choose to make of it. And I'm not trying to ever belittle how difficult some of the jobs may be or how underpaid they may be. But I think we make a big theological and frankly intellectual mistake to only say a high-end job is the only interesting thing.
I think it's a complete lie. I mean, this notion of separation between secular and sacred, I think it's a completely artificial distinction that is created in the mind of man. I just think that is not the case. And if you think about a stressful job, have you ever really watched the guys at McDonald's? I mean, those are stressful jobs.
Yeah. And the clock is ticking.
Yeah, and so it's a different kind of stress, obviously, and the pressures of trying to raise money and so on and to build big companies. But
you once said that work should never be, and our career should never be, when we describe them, we should not have the phrase "so that." I was really intrigued by that. Do you mind unpacking that? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Sure, yeah. So as I began to kind of conceive of work in this way, and by the way, this is not an academic thing for me. I would have quit in my mid-30s. I was, and Linda can attest to this, that I was either going to go, do some nonprofit thing, or I was going to figure this out. And out of this, what really happened for me is my work life came alive. And I'm still the CFO of a publicly traded company at the time, and then went on to run a division for them. But it just came alive. And the way I describe it is I changed jobs without changing business cards. I had just a massively different way of looking at jobs. And what happened through that is that there was no so that to why I work. I no longer work so that I can make a pile of money and give it away, or so that I can retire and then do something that really counts. And again, that's back to the test for me, and it really is a great test. Can you draw a connection between whatever you're doing in this moment, sitting in this meeting, giving this performance review, whatever it is, and make a connection between that and your purpose in life? And as we do, there is no so that, and that we then live a life on purpose. Every moment can be on purpose. And not perfectly, of course, because we're in bad moods and all that, but at least intellectually and more than intellectually, viscerally, it's like, I can see, by take a really mundane example, working on a formula in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, yeah, talk about tedium, right? So the folks who work for us who do that, well, why are you doing that? Well, it's because we need to get the strategic plan right. We had the numbers right in the strategic plan. Well, if you do, why does that matter? Well, so the business can be more successful. Why does that matter? So that by business being more successful, it can contribute to a better society through these 4 things we talk about. And, that's why what I'm doing right here, right now, connects to my purpose in life. And it's congruence and connectedness. If you can connect them in a way and it's congruent, then it just makes us come alive.
There's an exercise, some of you may have done it, that I've done with different companies and in smaller groups. It's called the 5 whys. The 5 whys. And what you just did, why are you doing that? When you get sort of usually a functional, operational, well, why do you do that? You get another, and usually about the third time you say, well, why do you do that? You're beginning to get into some sort of bigger meaning and purpose. And by the 5th why, often it's a transcendent kind of thing. But most leaders don't have the time and energy, or maybe not the creativity to think that way. Let's use this segue. The marketing hook to get some folks to come here today, the title was, what was the title? Something about a CEO, here we are, a conversation with a CFO mystic. Does God belong in the boardroom? Would you comment on that? So we could have truth in advertising here. That was our, what, mystic, CFO, boardroom, God, come on, you look crazy.
Okay, any questions? Well, that term, the label was put on me. I'm actually on a national board for a large nonprofit, and the CEO said, that's how he described me. We've been friends for a long time. Said, Barry, you're my CFO mystic friend. So, well, that doesn't quite fit together. So, we could go so many different ways with that. I guess if there's any kind of truth to the label.
A couple things. I'm mindful of our time, and I want to get questions in from folks, but run with that for a second.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, it's back to the way we see, and mystic has so much baggage around it, but the way I really think about that is a willingness to embrace mystery, and a willingness to look and see differently, and a sort of a prayer for second sight, that we might see. And so for me, there's just this richness that comes in seeing the world through a different lens, just like we're talking about here. So, for example, I think that we live in these 2 parallel worlds between the physical and the spiritual. And And we often compartmentalize them or think about them differently. And I've come to see that them as highly interrelated. And actually our work lives, whether it's career or being at home as a mom or as a grandparent or whatever it is, you just think about the work, that one of my, of course, examples is Jesus, who said, I have work that you know nothing about. My work is to do the will of him who sent me. I mean, so for example, if you begin to think about work in that way as an instrument of God's will, and you think, what happens for me is that it causes us to live fully in the present moment, and that every moment conspires to shape us into who we were designed to become. And my career has been the crucible for the formation of my soul.
Say it again.
My career has been the crucible for the formation of my soul. So I have grown.
Not church.
Not church. No. Church. I can't. I mean.
I don't mean to belittle church, but
no, and that we do that, and we go to Catholic church during the week and the Protestant church on the weekend because.
That's a little factoid about Barry. He goes to mass 5 or 6 days a week, and then to a Protestant church on Sundays.
Yeah, because we think each tradition looks.
So you hedging your bets, or what's the deal here?
No, I consider myself a follower of Jesus who happens to go these traditions.
Well, there's some mysticism also in that too.
And there's just a sense of I think each tradition looks at God, and even of course with a Jewish background as well, that there's this kind of embracing of the whole. And I think you see God through different lenses and get this much more fully orbed view of him. So back to the question of kind of every moment when you see it in this way, begins to take on a sense of meaning. And I mean, Thomas More has this great quote, says, "To the soul, the ordinary is sacred." And that has become very true for me, is that when our kids were growing up, we have 2 boys now, 27 and 25, but they had this song that they sang. It was called My Way or Yahweh. And it's just such a perfect microcosm of this in every moment. If you think, I encourage you, think about this as you go out throughout the day. In every moment, there's a choice to make. Am I doing this for myself or God? I'm in this meeting and I'm about to make a comment. Is it because I want to look smart in front of my peers? Or is it because I want to advance the cause of the meeting? And again, back to this connectedness. Why are you in a meeting? You wouldn't be in a meeting unless you thought it was going to advance the cause of the organization. By making a comment, I want to advance the cause of the meeting, which da-da-da-da. So my way or Yahweh, and I've come to see that this is a really kind of was an aha for me. That the genius of God's design is that he accomplishes work in our souls and in the world simultaneously. And he does it through the ordinary experiences of our lives. So by embracing what it is that we're doing right here, right now, so the question is, what's the right thing to do right here, right now? By embracing that question, my way or Yahweh, that is the way that we grow into this richness of life that we're designed to experience.
So you talk about achievement is no longer your God. You look at work through the filter of what would be pleasing to God. You have inverted the concept of finding meaning from your work, but imbuing and bringing meaning to your work. You've talked about parallel universes, so we're starting to get into string theory here now. Let me ask one more question, then we'll open up to others. Briefly, you're also inverting time. What do you mean by that?
Well, for me, and it's the temptation to those of us who are sort of performance-oriented, achievement-oriented, is to live in the future. So we can either live in the future, the plans of the future, or the memories of the past. It's a big, big challenge to live fully in the present moment. Even in this conversation, why are we doing this? You could ask that same question. Is it so we can, connect with each other in our shared humanity and hopefully learn from each other about, and maybe just take away a renewed perspective, or is it to make David Miller look even smarter than we know he already is? So.
That would take a lot of work.
Yeah, we're going to be here for the next 12 hours. So, every moment that's the case. So I think the perspective of time, and this was extremely hard for me. I mean, I was a plan your work and work your plan, start with the end in mind, that the culture just screams that at us. But for me, the heart of the spiritual journey, at both the beginning and the ongoing call, is surrender. Am I living my life for myself or for God for this lifetime or in this moment? So the real thing that came out of that Brazil experience was, instead of plan your work, work your plan, are you willing to live fully in the present moment and let me unfold the pattern of your life as I see fit? And that is an act of surrender that is based on trust. And for me, it's like, you have to come. God defined eternal life for us. He said, this is eternal life, that you might come to know me. So eternal life is to know God. And so for me, to know God is to trust him. So that there's a kind of gradient here. As we come to know him more, we come to trust him more. So then are you really engaged in this life of us? Or are you some kind of CEO in the universe that sits up there and pulls the levers like the Wizard of Oz? Or do you actually invite us to come in literally, as a young man marries a young woman, your builder will marry you. Are you really inviting us to come in to live with him and live with us? And you can have this ongoing friendship with him, and we can fall deeply and intimately in love with him. And I mean, if you get me talking about this, the tears come very easily. But I mean, as we fall deeply in love with this God, who is the only being of purity, that out of that intimacy comes and out of the overflow of the heart, that's how we go out into the world. He comes into us, we come into him, and we get to live in this mutually submitted love of the serenity of the Trinity. And then out of that, we get to go into these workplaces. And it's like, you experience this in business when you're connected with the board, and there's this power and togetherness. Or if you're on a sports team, or, I can tell if Linda and I are connected or not after all these years. And, if I'm out of whack with Linda, I'm out of whack with the world. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. So that what that says, we got to get connected. But when you're connected, where should we take this job or not? How should we make this decision about our kids? There's that power. So when that happens at the level of the creator of the universe, and we can be joined in this intimate connectedness with him and go out from that place into the world, it is a powerful.
I can even sense it in sort of your being at the moment.
Yeah.
But there's one thing you've said, and we'll open questions now, but I want to comment. You've also said that sometimes, life is not rosy. Things aren't always perfect. And sometimes we're called to lean into the pain. And you've used the phrase to let dark be even darker. And that to find God's presence even in those minutes. Because you're not talking about some happy, clappy, everything's wonderful. That sometimes our calling for a moment or for a season is to be an agent of God's grace and love in a very dark place. And that in its own way it's hard, but it's noble too.
Yeah, I mean, if any of you read, Linda calls them my dead friends, these people who've lived centuries ago. And maybe like John of the Cross talks about, the dark night of the soul. I've had years of the dark night of the soul. I mean, this Brazil experience was but one example, and working with very difficult people, and how do you do that? And the temptation is to kind of skirt around the edges, make it a little bit gray, as you said. But at least for me, the solution is to let the black grow blacker than black, and to walk right through the center and to embrace the pain. Yeah. Because when it's seen through the eyes of God, what happens is he brings purpose to the pain. Yeah. He is not a sadist. But he also disciplines us as sons and daughters. And so he will allow us, just like, those of us who are parents will, and it's painful. And to say that it's not is to spiritualize it, and it's a lie.
It's not authentic. Yeah. Not authentic. Yeah. Questions? Who'd like to ask Barry something? John? Yeah.
It sounds to me like a lot of what you're talking about is really the concept of that we're not just here it's not our company, it's not our money, it's really, we're here as a steward, it's stewardship. Mm-hmm. And too often in business schools or in business, we don't think that it's stewardship, that we're taking care of something for somebody else. We're thinking it's there for what does this mean for us? And it sounds like you've done a good job of working through those issues. How do you be a steward and still don't get fired because you're not doing a good job? And I like to hear, do you think stewardship is a good way to describe what you're trying to do, that you're trying to manage things for a multiple number of stakeholders, not just the investors?
Yeah, stewardship and delivering the goods.
Yeah, no, I think
30 seconds or less.
I think stewardship is a good way to think about it, but because nothing is ours. When you think about this as everything belongs to God and everything under the universe, and we are but instruments of that. But at least for me, stewardship has to start with surrender, because for me, there's a difference between the managed life and the surrendered life. And it's very easy to get into a bolt-on religion. I will do that, God bless me as I do this, versus for me, it's much more like a cucumber turning into a pickle.
Just what you're thinking of it, right?
Yeah. So, we immerse ourselves in God and his word and his presence, and out of that we are transformed. And if we don't allow this notion of surrender, and I mean, it's a long distance from the head to the heart, right? I mean, that 18 inches, at least for me, has taken like 35 years, and I'm probably 12% of the way there. But I think the concept is there. But actually, stewardship. To the second part of your question, how the connection between stewardship and doing a good job. Well, do you think God doesn't care about the success of the company? And obviously, you can get very close to the wrong thinking here around prosperity being connected to faith. But I think, why would God not want you to do your best at something? And so if you're called into this position as a CEO or a CFO or a worker on the line, that's our call, is to do whatever you find to do, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your strength as though working for God. I mean, that's it. So I see no conflict in being submitted to God and doing the very best that I'm called to do in whatever role it is.
They converge. Great. Other questions? Yeah.
Can you give an example of a decision you made, stewardship-wise, early in your career, before your spiritual awakening, that you would have made differently?
Example of a business decision, stewardship, or otherwise you would have made differently before your sort of spiritual awakening awareness?
Yeah, as I think about the decisions I regret, there's one decision that I particularly come back to on that. What would you have done differently? I was, so my first job out of business school was as a CFO of this startup company. I got kicked upstairs to be president after a couple of years, and we grew to a couple hundred employees, and was successful by most standards. And the company did an acquisition that was very controversial, and it was a new technology, and there's some ethical issues around that in terms of the guy I was working with actually offered a deal before it was approved by the board, and I was just uncomfortable. And it came to the board meeting, and actually this was like a week before I ended up leaving, but I didn't know I was leaving. And the board said, "How do you vote? We're going to take a vote." And everybody on the board said yes in favor of the acquisition, and I said I abstain. And I said, I abstain because, I'm the president. I don't want it to look bad in the eyes of the employees, but yet I don't feel like I can support it. And the board just jumped on me and said, "Barry, you can't abstain. You can't abstain. You have to vote yes or no." And I voted yes. And it was the wrong thing to do. I didn't have enough courage. And what I should have done is been much more thoughtful in advance about that and understood my responsibility and sort of let the chips fall where they may. And these were some very senior board members, and I was 33 years old. But I would have done that differently. And I think what's changed in me now, I think, is hopefully a deepened sense of centeredness and a sense of kind of knowing where the north is, and a bit more of, my call is to do the right thing right here, right now. And so I think I would have thought about that much more deeply. And I approached it too whimsically without enough thought.
Wow. I've been a little bit poor in time management tonight. So we try to have a hard stop at 8:30, and I've been so engrossed in the conversation that I've let us slip a couple minutes over that. So I'm going to wrap us up. You're welcome to stay and visit a bit more, and I think Barry has a bit of time if people want to
Lynn and I are here,
visit and get and talk to Lynn to get the real story here, where we didn't weave you in as much as we might have, and wish I, because you also have a powerful story with a fluke, if you'll pardon the expression, illness that you got when you were in South America that's dramatically changed your life, and yet your process of healing. So there's a powerful story on many levels that you bring as a couple. How about a warm round of applause for Barry and Linda?